Hello dear students, today we are on lesson number 2, New Kings and Kingdoms. Now, since in this book we are going to learn about the medieval period, so our next chapter is about the kings and kingdoms which were started during the 17th to 12th centuries, and this has taken or grown in many dynasties which has emerged in different states of the subcontinent. So let's start. Many new dynasties emerged after the 17th century. Map 1 shows the major ruling dynasties in different parts of the subcontinent between the 7th and the 12th centuries. Subcontinent, which are the subcontinents we had before in the ancient time? India was the map of India was not properly shaped, because in the ancient time people kept on moving from one place to another in search of food, in search of shelter, in search of crops also. And then during the flood also, natural calamities also, they kept on moving from one continent to the another continent. Now in present we know the names of the continent, but previously we had different continents. Subcontinents means the China will come, then Pakistan will come, Bhutan will come, Nepal will come. These were the continents which the ancient people kept on moving. Now the subcontinents like the Arabs of Mansura, Arabs of Multan, then Sais, Kashmir, Tibet, Nepal, then Kamarupa. All these are subcontinents. Okay. The emerge of a new dynasties. By the 17th century, there were big landlords or warrior chiefs in different regions of the subcontinent. Existing kings often acknowledged them as their subordinates as samantas. They were expected to bring gifts for their kings or overlords, be present at their courts, and provide them with military support. As samantas gained power and wealth, they declare themselves to be Mahasamanta, Mandalaswara, the great lord of a circle or region, and so on. Sometimes they asserted their independence from their overlords. One such instance was that of the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. Initially, they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka. In the mid-8th century, Dante Durga, a Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiranya Garbha, literally the golden womb. When this ritual was performed with the help of the Brahmanas, it was thought to lead to the rebirth of the sacrificer as a Kshatriya, even if he was not one by birth. In other cases, men from enterprising families used these military skills to carve out kingdoms. For instance, the Kadamba, Maurya Sharman, and the Gujara Pratihara Harichandra were Brahmins who gave up their traditional professions and took to arms, successfully establishing kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan respectively. So the emergence of the new dynasties, the new rulers were previously the big landlords or warriors working under samantas. They gradually gained power and wealth and thereafter declared themselves to be Mahasamanta. Then, Dante Durga, the Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual known as Hiranya Garbha. And some other lords like the Kadamba, Mayur Sharman, and the Gujara Pratihara Harichandra, they were the Brahmins by birth, used their military skills to establish their kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan. Next we have administration in the kingdom. Many of these new kings adopted high-sounding titles such as Maharaja, Adhiraja, Great King, Overlord of Kings, Tribhuvan Chakravarti, Lord of the Three Worlds, and so on. However, in spite of such claims, they often shared power with their Samantas as well as with associations of peasants, traders, and Brahmins. In each of these states, resources were obtained from the producers, that is, peasants, cattle keepers, artisans, who were often persuaded or compelled to surrender part of what they produce. Sometimes these were claimed as rent due to a lord who asserted that he owned the land. Revenue was also collected from traders. These resources were used to finance the king's establishment as well as for the construction of temples and forts. They were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead to the acquisitions of wealth in the form of plunder and access to land as well as trade routes. The functionaries for collecting revenue were generally recruited from influential families, and positions were often hereditary. This was true about the army as well as, in many cases, close relatives of the king held this position. So, about the administration in the kingdom, many of these new kings adopted titles like Maharaja, Adhiraja, and Tribhuvana Chakravarti, though they shared power with their Samantas. Samantas means equal, as well as with association of peasants, traders, and Brahmins. The producers, the peasants, the cattle keepers, artisans were the main feeders of their states. They used to give the part of the land to these Maharajas or Samantas as a rent. Then, pratisthis and land grants. Now, prashastis means in praise of. Whenever a king used to win a battle, then he used to be praised by the poets, and that is known as prashastis. Prashastis contain details that may not be literally true, but they tell us how rulers wanted to depict themselves as valiant, victorious warrior. For example, this was composed by learned Brahmanas, who occasionally helped in the administration. Kings often rewarded Brahmanas by grants of land. They were recorded on copper plates, which were given to those who received the land. Unusual for the 12th century was a long Sanskrit poem containing the history of the kings who ruled over Kashmir. It was composed by an author named Kalhana. He used a variety of sources including inscription, documents, eyewitness accounts, and earlier histories to write this account. Unlike the written of Prashastis, he was often critical about rulers and their policies. Now, Prashastis were composed by learned Brahmins in praise of the rulers. It used to depict the ruler as valiant and victorious warrior. Brahmins were also rewarded by grants of land. Kalhana's long poem in Sanskrit recorded the history of kings who ruled over Kashmir. He usually used a variety of sources, including inscription, documents, eyewitness account, and earlier histories in order to present his accounts. Next, we have warfare for wealth. Now, this one we'll see later on. First, we will read. You may have noticed that each of these ruling dynasties were based in specific region. At the same time, they tried to control other areas. One particularly prized area was the city of Kannauj in the Ganga Valley. For centuries, rulers belonging to the Gujara Pratihara Rashtrakuta, and Pala dynasties fought for control over Kannauj. Because there were three parties in this long drawn conflict, historians often describe it as the Tripathi Struggle. As we will see on page 62 to 66, rulers also tried to demonstrate their power and resources by building large temples. So when they attacked one another's kingdom, they often chose to target temples, which were sometimes extremely rich. You will read more about this in chapter 5. One of the best known for such ruler is Sultan Muhammad of Ghazni, Afghanistan. He ruled from 1997 to 10 to 1030 and extended control over parts of Central Asia, Iran and northwestern part of the subcontinent. He raided the subcontinent almost every year. His targets were wealthy temples, including that of Somnath, Gujarat. Much of the wealth Muhammad carried away was used to create a splendid capital city at Ghazni. Sultan Muhammad was also interested in finding out more about the people he conquered and entrusted a scholar named Al-Biruni to write an account of the subcontinent. This Arabic work, known as the Kitab-ul-Hind, remains an important source for historians. He consulted Sanskrit scholars to prepare their account. Other kings who engaged in warfare included the Chachamanas, later known as the Chauhans, who ruled over the region around Delhi and Ajmer. They attempted to expand their control to the west and the east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and the Gahadavalas of western Uttar Pradesh. The best known Chachamana ruler was Prithvi Raj III, who defeated an Afghan ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191, but lost to him the very next year in 1192. From Urayur to Thanjavur, how did the Cholas rise to power? A minor chiefly family known as the Muttariyar held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate to the Pallava kings of the Kanchipuram. Vijayala, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas from Urayur, captured the delta from the Muttariyar in the middle of the 9th century. He built the town of Thanjavur and a temple of goddess Nishumbhashudhini there. The successor of Vijayala conquered neighboring regions and the kingdom grew in size and power. The Pandyan and the Pallava territories to the south and north were made part of this kingdom. Rajaraja I, considered the most powerful Chola ruler, became king in 985 and expanded control over most of these areas. He also reorganized the administration of the empire. Rajaraja's son Rajendra I continued his policies and even raided the Ganga Valley, Sri Lankan countries of Southeast Asia, developing a navy for this expedition. Splendid temples and bronze sculptures. The big temples of Thanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram, built by Rajaraja and Rajendra, are architectural and sculptural marvels. Chola temples often became the nuclei of settlements which grew around them. These were centers of crop production. Temples were also endowed with land by rules as well as by others. The produce of these lands went into maintaining all the specialists who worked at the temple and very often lived near it. priest, garlands maker, cook, sweeper, musicians, dancers, etc. In other words, temples were not only places of worship, they were the hub of economic, social, and cultural life as well. Amongst the craft associated with temples, the making of bronze images was the most distinctive. Chola bronze images are considered amongst the finest in the world. While most images were of deities, sometimes images were made of devotees as well. Agriculture and irrigation. Many of the achievements of the Cholas were made possible through new developments in agriculture. Look at map 2 again. Notice that the river Kaveri branches off into several small channels through emptying into the Bay of Bengal. These channels overflow frequently, depositing fertile soil on their banks. Water from the channels also provides necessary moisture for agriculture, particularly the cultivation of rice. Although agriculture had developed earlier in other parts of Tamil Nadu, it was only from the 5th or 6th century that this area was opened up for large-scale cultivation. Forests had to be cleared in some regions, land had to be leveled in other areas. In the Delta region, embankments had to be built to prevent flooding, and canals had to be constructed to carry water to the fields. In many areas, 2 crops were grown in a year. In many cases, it was necessary to water crops artificially. A variety of methods were used for irrigation. In some areas, wells were dug. In other places, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. Remember that irrigation works require planning, organizing, labor and resources, maintaining this work and deciding on how water is to be shared. Most of the new rulers as well as people living in villages took an active interest in these cities' activities. Next, we have the administrations of the empire. How was the administration organized? Settlements or peasants known as Ur became prosperous with the spread of irrigation agriculture. Groups of such villages formed large units called Nadu. The village council and the Nadu performed several administrative functions, including dispensing justice and collecting taxes. So the administration of the empire were also well organized. The settlements of peasants grew prosperous with the widespread of irrigation agriculture. Now, rich peasants of the Velala caste exercised considerable control over the affairs of the Nadu under the supervision of the central Chola government. The Chola kings gave some rice land honors titles like Muvendavilan and Arihar as markers of respect and entrusted them with important offices of the state at the center. We have seen that Brahmins often received land grants or Brahmadaya. As a result, a large number of Brahmin settlements emerged in the Kaveri Valley as in other parts of South India. Each Brahmadaya was looked after by an assembly or sabha of prominent Brahmana landholders. These assemblies worked very efficiently. Their decisions were recorded in detail in inscription, often on the stone walls of temples. Associations of traders known as Nagarams also occasionally performed administrative functions in town. Inscriptions from Uttaramerur in Chingleput, district of Tamil Nadu, provides details of the way in which the Sabha was organized. The Sabha had separate committees to look after irrigation works, gardens, temples, etc. Names of those eligible to be members of these committees were written on smaller tickets of palm leaves. These tickets were put into an earthenware pot from which a young boy was asked to take out the tickets one by one for each committee. Inscriptions and taxes you will read. After you read, you can find out. So next time we'll meet with a new chapter. Till then, students, thank you so much and take care of yourself.